The rain fell in a steady, almost hypnotic rhythm, tapping against the dusty windshield of a solitary car parked in front of a flickering neon motel sign. The sign buzzed intermittently, vacancy, its red glow reflecting on puddles in the cracked asphalt. The narrator's voice cuts in softly, almost conspiratorially, drawing the audience into the story. It was supposed to be a routine stop, a night's rest on a long journey. But sometimes ordinary places hide extraordinary horrors. Inside the motel lobby, the air carried a faint mixture of mildew and bleach, a scent both mundane and unsettling. The walls were painted a tired beige, streaked with water stains, and the fluorescent lights overhead flickered at uneven intervals, casting restless shadows that seemed to shift just beyond the corners of the eye. The reception desk, coated in a thin layer of dust, was empty, save for a bell that had clearly not been touched in months. A single chair creaked gently in the corner as if nudged by an unseen presence. Our first protagonist, though not yet fully revealed, is a stand-in for every weary traveler. A figure shivering slightly from the damp cold, dragging a suitcase on wheels that screeches on the cracked tiles. Their footsteps echo in the empty lobby, mingling with the distant hum of the air conditioning unit, which coughs out bursts of warm and cold air at random. Each sound is amplified in the emptiness, creating an auditory sense of isolation. Listeners begin to feel the solitude, as if they themselves are standing there, alone, waiting for something they cannot see. The narrative voice continues, laced with both curiosity and subtle unease. You think you're prepared. You think a few miles on the road won't change you. But when the doors close behind you, and the walls hold more than just paint and plaster, fear becomes a very personal companion. As the words settle, the camera, or in the listener's mind, the focus, moves from the protagonist to the details of the room. A cracked mirror reflecting distorted images, the faded pattern of carpet that has seen decades of feet, the faint shadow of a figure in the corner that disappears when glanced at directly. Tension begins to build not through dramatic action, but through the sensory layering of ordinary things rendered subtly wrong. The distant drip of water from a leaky ceiling tile, the soft scuttle of something across the linoleum floor, the persistent buzzing of a neon light outside that never seems to stay steady. Each sound, each visual clue, adds weight to a growing sense of unease. Listeners' imaginations are coaxed into seeing and hearing more than the protagonists themselves, making them complicit in the fear. The emotional tone is a careful blend of normalcy and dread. The protagonist might sigh in relief at finally checking in, signing the register with slightly shaky hands, and receiving a small, dented key labeled Room 12. There is a fleeting sense of comfort in routine, but it is immediately undercut by the subtle oddities. The way the key feels unusually cold in the hand, the faint odor of something metallic on the carpet, or the distant sound of laughter. Too soft to identify, too sharp to ignore. Pacing here is deliberately slow, drawing the audience in with long, descriptive sentences that linger on the environment. The story teases them with the promise of horror without delivering immediate shocks. It's the calm before the storm, a breathing space that heightens anticipation. The listener's heart begins to match the rhythm of dripping water and flickering light, setting up a subconscious alignment with the protagonist's unease. The prologue ends on a mini-hook, a subtle but unforgettable cliffhanger. As the protagonist turns the key in the door to their room, a faint tapping comes from the far end of the hallway. It is soft, deliberate, and impossible to place, almost as if someone or something has been waiting for this exact moment. The narrator's voice dips, almost whispering, and that was the moment when everything changed. Sometimes the most terrifying stories begin not with screams, but with silence and a single knock. The listener is left suspended in that uneasy space, caught between curiosity and dread, perfectly primed to move into the first full story, where ordinary motel rooms reveal their darkest secrets. The rain had softened into a persistent drizzle by the time the young couple pulled into the cracked asphalt lot of the roadside motel. Their car's headlights illuminated peeling paint, rusted railings, and a sagging roof over the lobby door, giving the place the unmistakable aura of neglect. Despite the unease that flickered across their faces, there was an air of excitement, A road trip adventure turned into a night of cheap lodging. The narrator's voice drifts in, low and deliberate, pulling the listener closer. They thought it would be just another night, just another laugh-filled stop along the way. But sometimes, the places we choose to rest are already waiting for us, waiting with something else in mind. Inside, the motel smelled of stale coffee, damp carpet, and something that lingered beneath the surface. A faint metallic tang that made the back of the throat tighten. The couple walked slowly down the narrow corridor, the dull fluorescent lights above buzzing intermittently. Each flicker cast long, stretching shadows that seemed to crawl along the faded floral wallpaper. Their conversation, light and teasing at first, gradually softened as an inexplicable chill brushed over them, crawling down their spines despite the warmth of the summer evening outside. The couple arrived at room 13, a number that seemed to hang ominously on the old brass plaque. The door creaked when they opened it, protesting against years of disuse. Inside, the room was small, almost claustrophobic, with mustard yellow walls that had begun to discolor around the edges. A thin bedspread covered the mattress, patterned with shapes that were difficult to discern in the dim lamplight. The air was heavy, thick with the lingering smell of cigarette smoke and an underlying mustiness that hinted at years of transient occupants. The protagonist, each of the two, in turn, felt the subtle shift from playful curiosity to low-level unease, the kind of fear that doesn't announce itself but whispers in peripheral vision. The tension builds slowly. A clock on the wall ticks irregularly, its hands jerking forward in unexpected leaps. The hum of the neon sign outside penetrates the thin walls, pulsing with an unnatural rhythm. Somewhere down the hall, a door slams softly, startling the couple, though they insist it is just the wind. Yet the listener can sense the pattern, ordinary noises becoming markers of anticipation, every echo and creak a note in the soundtrack of suspense. The emotional stakes deepen when the couple begins unpacking. The female protagonist unzips a suitcase, finding that the clothes inside feel heavier than they should. A faint scratching noise comes from behind the closet door. The male protagonist laughs nervously, brushing it off, yet the narrator's voice layers tension with subtle commentary. Laughter is the first shield against fear, but even the strongest shield can be pierced when the night has plans of its own. The scratching continues intermittently, never fully heard, never fully understood, like something moving just out of reach, deliberately unseen. Moments of calm are interspersed with sudden spikes in tension. The couple decides to watch television, the low hum of static filling the room. The screen flickers, showing images of a motel corridor remarkably similar to the one they occupy, shadows moving where none should. Their unease deepens, and the temperature in the room seems to drop perceptibly. The female protagonist wraps herself in the thin bedspread, shivering despite the warmth outside. The male protagonist moves toward the door, trying to reassure both himself and his partner, only to find a faint handprint where none should be, pressed against the polished brass doorknob. The narrative emphasizes the psychological impact, drawing the audience into the couple's slowly unraveling sense of safety. Every sensory detail is heightened. The faint metallic smell intensifies as if something unseen has been dragging itself across the floor. A sudden creak from the corner makes them jump in unison. The shadows in the room stretch longer, coiling toward them as the fluorescent light flickers violently. Each heartbeat is mirrored by the tapping of the audience's own imagination, synchronizing listener and character in shared fear. The night escalates in unnerving subtlety. They hear the faint sound of whispering, soft and indistinct, coming from the air vents. The whispers sound like their own names, almost carried by the wind, almost imagined, but the fear is real. The couple huddles together, trembling, exchanging nervous glances. Their internal dialogue is expressed in whispered sentences. Did you hear that? It's nothing. No, it's definitely something. The tension is not just external. It is inside them, reflected in their breathing, in their rapid heartbeat, in the inability to feel safe even in their room. Just as the couple begins to settle, the climax of tension strikes. The bedspread lifts slightly, as if something beneath it has moved. A low, deliberate knock comes from the wall, soft, measured, yet unmistakable. They freeze, staring at one another in horror, every rational explanation fading into dread. The camera, or imagination, pans slowly across the room. The closet door is slightly ajar. The lamp flickers violently. The television's static pulses in rhythm with the knocking. There is no one visible, yet the presence is undeniable, oppressive, and intimate. The mini-hook closes the scene with lingering ambiguity, leaving listeners on edge. The male protagonist approaches the door to investigate, hesitating with a hand on the knob, breath caught in his chest. The narrator leans in, whispering through the story. Sometimes, the uninvited guest doesn't knock at the door. It waits inside, unseen, patient, and closer than you think. The tension hangs, unresolved, a perfect transition into the next story, promising that the motel's horrors are far from over. The morning light struggled to penetrate the grimy windows of the motel, painting the hallways in dull, gray streaks that made every corner feel longer, every shadow deeper. The protagonist, a lone traveler, had just returned from a sleepless night on the road, hoping for a few hours of rest before continuing the journey. There was an unease in the air, subtle but persistent, like the hum of electricity before a storm. The narrator's voice cuts in softly, drawing the listener in. Some people pass through motels without notice. Others are noticed whether they realize it or not. The traveler stepped into the narrow corridor, dragging a suitcase that squeaked with every hesitant movement. The walls were coated in peeling wallpaper. The floral pattern faded into an unrecognizable blur. A faint smell of disinfectant lingered, masking something else. Something metallic and bitter, almost like blood. The distant hum of a faulty heater added to the oppressive silence, broken only by the occasional creak of a floorboard somewhere down the hallway. The protagonist paused, sensing that the space around them was more alive than it should be, though the motel appeared entirely empty. At first, the unease manifested in minor observations. The housekeeper's cart, abandoned mid-hall, its cloth covering stained and wrinkled, the cleaning supplies haphazardly scattered. No one was in sight, yet the subtle signs of movement suggested recent activity. The protagonist frowned, checking the nearest door to see if the housekeeping staff was attending a room. No answer. A soft shuffle came from the end of the hall, almost as if someone had stepped quietly on a loose tile, then vanished. The tension builds as the traveler becomes aware of inconsistencies. Every floorboard creak, every whisper of wind through the broken window panes, seems deliberate. The air grows colder, each step echoing more loudly than it should. Objects that had been stationary appear to shift slightly, subtly, when glanced at indirectly. The audience begins to share the protagonist's paranoia, feeling every minuscule sound as if it were amplified within the quiet corridors. The narrative digs into the psychological dimension of fear. The traveler begins to second-guess themselves, eyes darting toward shadows that seem to stretch unnaturally. The air feels thicker with each passing moment, the weight of unobserved presence pressing down on shoulders and chest. They notice a room key on the floor, unclaimed and cold, marked Room 7. Picking it up, a shiver runs down their spine, as if the key itself is an omen. The sound of the distant housekeeping cart rolling softly across the floor resonates unnervingly in the empty hallway. Moments of calm are fleeting. The traveler moves cautiously, attempting to locate the housekeeper, calling out softly. Their voice echoes unnaturally, bouncing off the walls and returning warped, as if the motel itself is listening. Then comes the first real shock. The cart reappears closer than it should have been, as if teleported, the cleaning supplies slightly rearranged. The audience feels the subtle shift from ordinary fear to creeping dread, sensing that something beyond human is manipulating the space around the protagonist. The suspense escalates when the traveler notices faint footprints in the dust along the corridor, small, deliberate, and eerily childlike, leading to a door at the far end. With each step closer, the temperature drops further, breath condensing in small clouds. The lighting flickers violently as if reacting to unseen presence. There is an auditory layering, distant whispers, the scraping of a metal cart, the faintest echo of a laugh, soft but unmistakable. The narrative emphasizes the protagonist's growing psychological turmoil, describing racing heartbeat, cold sweat, and the trembling grip on the key. Suddenly, the door at the end of the hallway swings open silently, revealing a room in disarray. Towels are scattered, bedsheets pulled hastily, as if someone vanished mid-task. The protagonist steps inside cautiously, noticing subtle movements in the corner of the room, shadows shifting where nothing should be. A muffled sound comes from behind the closet door, soft and deliberate. Heart racing, they approach it, fingers trembling. When the door swings open, it is empty. The housekeeper is nowhere to be found. The tension peaks when the protagonist discovers the most unnerving detail: a message scrawled on the back of the bathroom mirror in condensation. Words that were not there moments before. It reads, "I've been watching you." The narrator's voice lowers, almost a whisper. Some warnings are meant not to guide you, but to remind you that even in spaces meant for rest, someone or something is never far away. The traveler backs away, panic rising, and the room seems to contract around them. Shadows press closer, every ordinary object now a potential threat. The scene ends on a chilling mini-hook, designed to keep the audience on edge. As the protagonist turns to leave the room, a faint, panicked whisper calls their name from the far end of the hall. There is no one there. The door to room 7, the key still in hand, clicks softly, locked from the inside. The sound lingers in the air, a quiet but undeniable promise that the motel's horrors are far from over, and the next story will bring even more terror. The night had deepened into a velvet darkness that pressed heavily against the motel windows, muting the occasional drip of rain outside into near silence. The college student had arrived hours earlier, weary from the long drive and a day full of campus activities. The flickering neon sign outside painted the small room in alternating shades of red and blue, its light cutting across the walls in jagged, uneven patterns. The narrator's voice cuts through, low and deliberate. Some nights, the world feels normal, even safe. But safety is an illusion that can vanish with a single knock. The student sat on the edge of the bed, unpacking the essentials: books, laptop, and a small travel bag. Each item that touched the floor seemed to make a disproportionately loud sound, bouncing off the cracked linoleum and warped wooden furniture. The air smelled faintly of cigarette smoke, damp carpet, and something else, something metallic that the student couldn't identify. It was the kind of smell that clung to the skin, refusing to be ignored. The room was small, claustrophobic, and every shadow seemed just a little too long, stretching toward the corners in unnatural ways. The initial moments were deceptively calm. The student attempted to focus on the laptop screen, scrolling aimlessly, but a subtle unease grew with each passing minute. The low hum of the heater was inconsistent, periodically cutting out and leaving the room in heavy, oppressive silence. The ordinary rhythm of the night became irregular. The tick of a wall clock seemed louder, the neon sign buzzed in erratic pulses, and the distant drip of water hit the floorboards in a cadence that mimicked a heartbeat. The listener is drawn into the quiet, sharing the protagonist's growing sense of dislocation. Then the first sound arrived, soft at first, almost imperceptible. A single, deliberate knock on the door. The student froze, fingers hovering over the laptop keys. The knock repeated, slow and rhythmic, echoing unnaturally in the narrow room. The narrator adds tension. It's a sound you think you understand. A knock at the door is ordinary, until it isn't. The student called out, voice trembling slightly. Hello? Who's there? Silence. Only the persistent knocking continues, impossible to locate. The tension ratchets upward as the student rises, cautiously approaching the door. Every step on the creaking floorboard is exaggerated, echoing like a warning. The handle feels unusually cold in their hand. A shiver runs down the spine as the knocking stops abruptly, replaced by an almost imperceptible scraping sound from somewhere beyond the door. The student recoils, heart pounding, realizing that the sounds aren't random. They are deliberate, almost taunting. The audience is drawn into a mirrored terror, imagining each step and every sound as part of the horror. The narrative deepens the psychological tension. The student retreats to the bed, eyes darting to every corner of the room. Shadows twist and lengthen, responding to the flickering neon light. The air grows colder, fingers of icy draft creeping along the skin, brushing against exposed arms. A distant, indistinct whisper reaches the ear, sounding eerily like their own name. The mind, already on high alert, begins to race, blending perception and imagination. Each minor detail, the swaying of a curtain, a subtle reflection in the cracked mirror, becomes a potential threat. Moments of false calm are inserted to make the audience vulnerable, as in cinematic pacing. The student convinces themselves that it's a prank, that the motel is old and making noises. They pick up a nearby book and attempt to focus, trying to rationalize what is happening. The air remains heavy, yet silent, and then, almost imperceptibly, the room temperature drops further, frosting the corners of the window panes. Shadows gather near the edges of the walls, coalescing into shapes that seem to move with intent. The intensity spikes again. Another knock, this time louder, sharper, closer. The student, trembling, slowly moves to the door and presses an ear against it. The silence that follows is deafening. Then, unmistakably, the knocking comes from inside the room itself, from a corner just beyond the bed. The student spins around, heart in the throat, but sees nothing. The shadows retreat momentarily as the fluorescent light flickers violently. Every nerve is alert, every sense screaming that the room is no longer safe. A crescendo of sensory terror builds. The faint sound of a chair dragging across the floor is audible, though nothing is visible. The metal frame of the bed squeaks in rhythm with each heartbeat. The temperature continues to drop, the air thick with anticipation. The faint smell of something coppery, metallic, invades the nostrils, growing stronger with every breath. The protagonist's mind races. It's impossible. There's no one here. Yet it is happening. The audience feels the claustrophobia, the inability to hide, the suffocating dread of unseen presence. The mini-hook arrives as the story peaks. The student, paralyzed with fear, watches as the door handle rattles violently, though no one touches it. A whisper emerges from the shadows near the window, clear this time. "You shouldn't be here." The knock continues, now a symphony of deliberate terror echoing from every corner of the room. The narrator's voice drops lower, almost a hiss. Sometimes, the loudest knocks come from where you least expect them. From within, from shadows, from the fear that refuses to let you go. The section closes on a chilling cliffhanger, priming the audience for the next story. The student backs away from the door, eyes fixed on the corner of the room where the shadows now seem to breathe, flickering in rhythm with the neon outside. Their trembling hand hovers near a suitcase, half convinced that hiding is possible. But the knocking, now deafening in its persistence, continues. The camera, or the listener's imagination, lingers on the empty room, waiting, anticipating, promising that the terror has only just begun. The motel corridor was quiet that evening, the fluorescent lights buzzing intermittently overhead, casting long, trembling shadows along the faded carpet. The business traveler had been on the road for hours, a long day of meetings leaving their shoulders tight and their mind foggy. They were expecting the ordinary, a simple room, a bed, and a meal delivered quietly from the front desk. The narrator's voice cuts in, soft and unsettling. Some nights, the ordinary becomes sinister, not with a scream, but with a subtle, creeping wrongness you can't shake. The traveler set down a worn briefcase by the door, rubbing tired eyes, and sank into the stiff motel chair. The faint smell of cigarette smoke and disinfectant mingled with the lingering aroma of food from the elevator vent. The air felt slightly heavier than it should, pressing against their chest, almost imperceptibly at first. They ordered room service, expecting the familiar knock within minutes, a tray of simple items to fill a gnawing hunger. Minutes passed, silence stretched, unbroken, but then came the knock, sharp, deliberate, echoing unnaturally down the narrow hallway. The traveler rose, a sense of mild irritation mixed with fatigue, and opened the door. The tray was there, balanced perfectly on a small cart. The items looked normal at first glance, but a subtle sense of wrongness prickled at the edge of perception. The eggs were slightly gray around the edges, the coffee smelled burnt, and the bread had an odd metallic taste even before touching it. The tension builds as the traveler examines the tray more closely. The narrator leans in, drawing the listener into the unsettling detail. It's the little things that go unnoticed until they aren't, until you realize that something ordinary has twisted just out of reach. A piece of paper rests atop the tray, a note written in familiar handwriting, but with letters that seem to shift and flicker in the dim light. You're not alone. The words are unmistakable and yet impossible. The traveler freezes, every muscle taut with sudden fear. Pacing slows briefly to allow psychological tension to settle. The traveler looks around the room, every corner suddenly suspicious. Shadows cling to the walls, and the faint hum of the air conditioner is irregular, creating the sense of movement just beyond sight. Each breath feels heavy, almost laborious, as though the air itself has thickened, pressing in from the corners. The room seems smaller, closer, as if the walls are leaning in, and the familiar furniture now appears subtly distorted. Edges sharper, shadows darker. The traveler reaches for the coffee cup, and the faint metallic tang that had been in the air now lingers stronger. The surface of the liquid shimmers, reflecting shapes that aren't present in the room. The bread feels oddly warm despite the cold tray, and the fork trembles in their hand without explanation. The subtle, creeping dread that has been simmering throughout the night begins to crystallize into outright fear. Sudden auditory shocks punctuate the slow-building tension. The tray slides slightly on its own, the sound of metal scraping against metal sharp in the quiet. The television flickers and clicks, static briefly revealing shapes moving unnaturally in the reflection of the screen. Shapes that vanish the instant the traveler blinks. The faintest whisper comes from the hallway, a hissing, unintelligible sound, but unmistakably present. The traveler's heartbeat accelerates, each pulse echoing in the confined space. Psychological horror intensifies as the traveler begins to suspect a presence unseen. Footsteps are heard outside the door, yet no one appears in the peephole. The walls themselves seem to vibrate in rhythm with the faint sound of whispering, as if the room is alive, responding to their fear. The tray sits innocently in the center, yet each glance at it fuels the mind's growing paranoia. Even the faint hum of the air conditioner seems conspiratorial, a rhythm that synchronizes with the tremor in their hands. The mini-hook arrives as the narrative crescendos into a moment of sharp tension. The traveler, now trembling, lifts the note again. The letters have rearranged themselves, shifting before their eyes. I'm inside. The narration's voice drops, almost a whisper, cutting directly into the listener's imagination. Room service is supposed to bring comfort, nourishment, not a visitor that hides in the shadows and waits for you to notice. The fear is intimate, the sense that something unseen is deliberately testing boundaries, waiting for the moment to strike. The section closes on a chilling cliffhanger. As the traveler steps back from the tray, the sound of slow, deliberate breathing comes from behind the closed bathroom door. The tray's items begin to tremble slightly, as if in response. The light flickers violently, casting grotesque, dancing shadows across the walls. The narrator leaves the listener suspended. Some nights, the guest doesn't arrive at the door. It comes to you, unseen, lingering just out of reach, patient, and relentless. The audience is left with a sense of claustrophobic unease, perfectly primed for the next story, where doors lock and shadows whisper with intent. The hallway stretched endlessly, narrow and dim, with walls streaked in dull beige that had long since lost their original color. The backpacker had arrived at the motel hours earlier, exhausted from a day of hiking through winding country roads, and the quiet of the place initially seemed like a reprieve. But the moment they stepped into the corridor, a subtle wrongness pressed in, a heaviness in the air, the faint metallic scent that clung to the corners of the narrow passage. The narrator's voice cuts in, low and deliberate. Some doors are meant to stay closed. Others are closed because someone or something wants to keep you out or in. The backpacker moved cautiously down the hallway, dragging a worn duffel bag. The floorboards creaked underfoot, each squeak echoing louder than expected, bouncing off the walls and mingling with the faint hum of the flickering fluorescent lights above. The air smelled faintly of mildew and disinfectant, but beneath it lingered a coppery tang, subtle yet unmistakable. At first, it was easy to ignore, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger with every step. The shadows cast by the overhead lights shifted unnaturally, elongating in ways that seemed deliberate, almost sentient. The first hint of true unease came in the form of a door at the far end of the hall. Unlike the others, its paint was darker, older, the edges chipped and worn. It had no number, only a small, brass handle that gleamed despite the dust. The backpacker approached, curiosity mixed with hesitation, the quiet hum of electricity buzzing through the corridor. As they drew near, a sudden cold draft brushed against the back of their neck, sending a shiver down their spine. The narrator whispers, "A door is a promise. Behind it something waits, something patient." The backpacker tried the handle. Locked, firm, unyielding. A simple, ordinary lock, yet it carried an inexplicable weight, a foreboding energy that made the skin crawl. They knocked gently, curiosity tinged with the thrill of unease. Silence. Then a faint scratching sound came from within, soft, deliberate, unhurried. Heartbeats quickened. The sound was unmistakably real, but no human could be inside. The room appeared empty. The psychological tension tightened like a vice. Every step and sound amplified in the stillness. The narrative lingers on sensory details to heighten dread. The walls seem to pulse subtly, the shadows bending toward the locked door. The distant sound of water dripping somewhere down the hall mirrored the backpackers' rising panic. Their breath became shallow, audible in the near silence. The faint metallic scent intensified, mingling with the subtle, almost imperceptible hint of decay. Every minor sound, a scuff of a shoe, a soft groan of the structure, felt like an intentional signal, a warning that the door was not ordinary. The backpacker leans closer, pressing an ear to the door. The faintest whisper, indistinct but urgent, brushes against their consciousness. A voice calls their name softly, almost impossibly, echoing in the narrow corridor. Panic rises. Rational thought collides with instinctual fear. Every rational explanation crumbles. The door, the air, the shadows, they all seem to breathe, alive, aware. The atmosphere thickens with dread, making the listener share the protagonist's growing sense of claustrophobia and impending threat. Attempts to move on fail. The backpacker's attention is magnetically drawn to the door. Their fingers brush the brass handle again, icy cold despite the warmth of the corridor. Another faint scratching, louder this time, comes from inside, as though something behind the door is shifting, aware of their presence. The narrative emphasizes the internal fear, describing the racing heartbeat, the trembling hands, the shallow, rapid breathing, and the suffocating weight of anticipation. Every sound becomes a potential threat, every shadow a looming figure. Suddenly, the room key in the backpacker's pocket vibrates slightly, an inexplicable sensation that startles them. The handle rattles as if responding to an unseen hand. A subtle, almost imperceptible whisper curls around their ear. "You shouldn't be here." The backpacker stumbles backward, pressing against the opposite wall, heart pounding. The fluorescent light flickers violently, momentarily plunging the corridor into darkness. In that brief moment, shadows stretch across the floor in impossible ways, seeming to reach for them, then vanish as the light returns. The tension escalates with every heartbeat. The backpacker contemplates fleeing, but curiosity anchors them in place, every instinct screaming that what is behind the door is more than just empty space. A low creak, unmistakable and deliberate, emanates from the hinges. The whispering resumes, fragmented but urgent, threading through the silence. "Open me or leave, but don't forget me." The corridor itself feels alive, responding to fear, amplifying it, reflecting it back in distorted, unnatural ways. The climax of tension arrives as the backpacker takes a tentative step back toward the door, fingertips brushing the handle once more. Suddenly, A loud, metallic thump resonates from within the room, startling them violently. The lock shakes, though nothing human touches it. Shadows in the hallway seem to twist and writhe, as if the walls themselves are sentient, aware of the trespasser. The narrator lowers their voice, a whisper threading into the listener's imagination. Some doors are locked because what lies behind them should never see the light. But some doors are locked because what is inside wants to see you. The section closes on a chilling mini-hook. The backpacker stumbles backward, breathing ragged, eyes darting toward the room numberless door. A faint, panicked voice calls from inside, distorted yet unmistakably familiar, and the handle rattles violently once more. The corridor falls silent again, leaving the backpacker frozen, trapped between fear and curiosity. The narrator leaves the audience hanging in suspense. The locked door conceals more than mystery. It holds the promise of terror waiting patiently for the next step. The motel corridor stretched in oppressive silence, dimly lit by the inconsistent flicker of a single fluorescent tube. The walls, faded and peeling, bore the scars of decades of transient guests, each mark whispering stories no one dared ask about. The solo female traveler had been settling into her room after a long day, expecting nothing more than a quiet night of rest. But the air carried a subtle, almost imperceptible wrongness, a tension threading through every creak of the floorboards, every hum of the faulty heater. The narrator's voice slices through the quiet. Some fear comes not from what you see, but from what you feel, an awareness that you are being watched, even when the world appears empty. Her suitcase clicked softly against the floor as she set it down, the sound unnaturally loud in the corridor silence. The smell of bleach and damp carpet mingled with something faintly metallic, lingering, almost intentional. At first, she shrugged it off, telling herself it was the motel's age, the stress of travel, or her imagination. But shadows seemed to linger a little longer than they should, and the hum of the air conditioner fluctuated oddly, punctuated by faint, intermittent creaks elsewhere in the building. Every minor sensory detail pressed against her nerves like a subtle, unrelenting reminder that something was off. The tension grows as the traveler notices subtle inconsistencies. From her window, the neon sign outside casts red and blue shadows that stretch across her room, forming shapes that dissolve the moment she blinks. The faint echo of footsteps drifts through the corridor, though she had been alone when she checked. She listens intently, straining to understand what is real. The narrator leans in, drawing the listener deeper. Being alone is no protection. Sometimes the walls carry secrets, and the spaces between them are filled with eyes you can't see. She peers through the peephole of her door and glimpses a figure, just a shadow at first, moving down the hallway. The shadow pauses, as though aware of her gaze, and then retreats silently. Her heart jumps, pulse spiking, as she whispers to herself, "It must be a guest, someone passing by." Yet every instinct screams differently. The audience feels her fear as intimately as their own heartbeat, recognizing that isolation amplifies every ordinary sound, every flicker of light, into a potential threat. The narrative emphasizes psychological horror over overt action. The traveler attempts to settle into the room, closing the blinds, switching on the lamp. Yet nothing alleviates the sensation of being followed, of eyes lingering just out of sight. Shadows in the corners deepen unnaturally. The faint metallic scent strengthens, now clearly accompanying a sense of menace. A door somewhere along the hallway creaks open and shuts softly, a rhythm that is deliberate, measured, almost mocking. She tenses, fingers tightening around the edge of her suitcase, eyes scanning for signs of intrusion. Suddenly, the stalker reveals themselves not fully, but just enough. A reflection catches her eye in the hallway mirror. Movement behind the glass, someone or something, standing just beyond the frame. She spins, but the corridor is empty. The narrative voice intensifies the suspense. Some predators are invisible until you realize they are closer than you thought, hiding in plain sight, studying your every move. Her breathing becomes shallow, rapid, almost syncing with the faint squeak of a floorboard somewhere along the hall, footsteps that should not be there. Moments of heightened tension alternate with slower, creeping dread. She hides partially behind the door, listening to a soft shuffle of shoes. A note slips under her door, paper curling slightly. A single sentence written in a scrawled, deliberate hand. "I've seen you. Always." Her stomach twists, panic rising. Every shadow, every reflection becomes suspect. The ordinary motel room, walls, furniture, even the air, now feels like a trap. The atmosphere is dense, heavy, oppressive. The claustrophobia heightened by the impossibility of escape in the quiet night. The emotional impact deepens when she hears the faintest whisper outside her door. Her own name, elongated and distorted. She freezes, heart hammering, every muscle taut. Rationality collides with fear. She checks the peephole again. The hallway is empty. She listens intently, straining to discern any sound. But the silence is too complete, too deliberate. The narrator's voice leans close, whispering to the listener. The walls hear more than you realize. They remember, and sometimes, they watch with you. The tension peaks as the stalker leaves a final clue of their presence. A photograph slips under her door, taken from inside her room. In it, she is sleeping, unaware, captured moments ago. Panic becomes near hysteria. Every instinct screams to flee, yet the hallway outside remains still, silent, unyielding. Her mind races, imagination blending with reality, the psychological terror now indistinguishable from what may be real. The shadowy corridor becomes a character in itself, alive, predatory, anticipating every step she might take. The section closes on a chilling cliffhanger. She backs away from the door, clutching the photograph, breath ragged. A faint knock comes from inside the room, impossible yet undeniable. The light flickers violently, casting grotesque, writhing shadows along the walls. The narrator leaves the listener suspended in terror. Some nights, the watcher is closer than you think, hidden in plain sight, waiting for you to notice, before it's too late. The audience is left poised between curiosity and dread, perfectly primed for the next story, where the supernatural will merge with the psychological. The motel room was dimly lit, the fading neon glow from the sign outside casting jagged shadows across the cracked linoleum floor. The solo traveler had just returned from an exhausting day, eager to rest in the small, unassuming room. Yet the air seemed charged with a strange, almost imperceptible energy, as if unseen eyes were tracking each movement. The narrator's voice drifts through the scene, low and haunting. Some rooms are empty in the ordinary sense, but not truly vacant. They carry remnants of those who lingered too long, and sometimes those remnants watch with patience. The traveler set down a weathered backpack, rubbing a hand across their face in a gesture meant to shake off the fatigue. The faint odor of mildew mingled with something subtler, something metallic and oddly sweet, clinging to the corners of the room. At first, the sensations were easily dismissed. The flickering lamp, the distant hum of the heater, the creak of floorboards under the settling building. But subtle anomalies began to build an uneasy rhythm. A chair shifted slightly as if nudged, a pillow appeared misplaced, and the thin curtains fluttered without a breeze. The first indication of the phantom roommate came unexpectedly. While unpacking, the traveler felt a chill brush past the shoulder, fleeting and almost dismissible. A soft whisper followed, indistinct yet deliberate, a sound threading through the quiet. "I'm here." They froze, eyes darting across the room. Nothing was visible, yet every instinct screamed that someone or something had entered the space while they were distracted. The narrator leans in, drawing the listener's imagination close. The quietest guests are often the most dangerous. You cannot see them, yet they exist in every shadow, every reflection, every hesitation. The tension ratchets slowly, allowing psychological dread to fester. The traveler moves toward the small bathroom, sensing a presence lingering just out of view. The faint metallic scent intensifies, mingling with the odor of damp carpet, creating a suffocating layer of unease. The faucet drips rhythmically, each drop punctuating the silence. Shadows seem to coalesce in corners, bending unnaturally, as if leaning toward the traveler. The floorboards creak behind them, but when they turn, nothing is there. The narrative emphasizes the protagonist's mental state: racing heart, shallow breathing, cold sweat, and the growing awareness that they are not alone. As the night deepens, the phantom roommate becomes increasingly active in subtle, terrifying ways. A light switches on and off in the corner of the room with no source. Personal items are moved slightly, drawers left ajar after being closed. A book falls from the shelf when no hand is near. The traveler whispers, questioning their own sanity, eyes darting from corner to corner. Every ordinary sound, the hum of the heater, a flicker of the lamp, the distant buzz of the neon sign, becomes amplified in the mind, morphing into something deliberate, malevolent. The narrative heightens emotional impact with intimate sensory details. The traveler sits on the edge of the bed, trying to calm their racing pulse. But the room is not static. The temperature drops sharply, breath condensing in thin clouds. The faint whisper returns, clearer now, repeating a chilling refrain. "You can't leave. I'm here." The words are impossible to locate, coming from multiple directions, as if the room itself has become a cage. Shadows stretch unnaturally across the walls, forming shapes that seem human but dissolve the instant they are stared at directly. Moments of calm are brief but necessary, heightening the contrast in tension. The traveler moves to the small desk, trying to focus on a notebook, a pen scratching across the page. Yet the sound is accompanied by a faint shuffle from behind, soft, deliberate, as though footsteps follow the rhythm of writing. Objects tremble slightly on the desk, as if moved by unseen hands. The narrative emphasizes the internal battle, rational explanation versus intuitive fear. The room seems to respond to awareness, every glance, every breath, feeding the tension further. The intensity spikes dramatically as the phantom roommate reveals more tangible signs of presence. The bedspread lifts slightly, forming a subtle mound as if someone has lain there for just a moment. The chair by the desk slowly rotates, squeaking softly, and the curtain moves with no breeze. A shadow passes across the hallway mirror, elongated and distorted, but when the traveler turns, it vanishes. The whispering grows insistent, layering over itself, coming from every corner simultaneously. "Stay! Don't move! You belong here." The climax of terror comes when the traveler, paralyzed by fear, tries to open the door to escape. The handle is cold, icy, and refuses to turn. Every instinct screams to flee, yet the corridor outside is unreachable. The room itself seems to tighten around them, shadows pressing closer, walls narrowing, the flickering light casting grotesque, dancing shapes. The narrator's voice hovers like a shadow in the listener's mind. Sometimes, the guest never leaves. Sometimes, the room keeps you, and you begin to realize the walls are no longer just walls, they are guardians or predators. The section closes on a cliffhanger designed to leave the audience suspended in dread. The traveler backs into the corner, eyes wide, breath quickening. A low, deliberate knock echoes from the bathroom door, followed by a soft whisper, "I see you." The shadows twitch, forming almost human shapes that vanish when looked at directly. The lamp flickers violently, then stabilizes, leaving the room silent once more. Yet the oppressive presence remains, unseen but undeniably there. A reminder that some roommates are never truly gone, and some motels are never truly empty. The motel room was heavy with a stillness that felt unnatural, as if time itself had paused. The lone traveler had been trying to rest after a long night on the road, but an unease gnawed at the edges of consciousness. The dim glow of the neon sign outside sliced through the partially closed blinds, casting irregular red and blue light across the walls. The narrator's voice enters, deliberate and chilling. Some walls hold memories. Others, they hold something far darker, waiting for the curious or the foolish to notice. The traveler had chosen a room at random, unaware of the subtle warning etched into its very structure. The air was thick with the faint smell of mildew, mingled with something metallic that was almost imperceptible at first, like copper rubbed into the corners of the room. It clung to the skin, creating a subconscious awareness that something was profoundly wrong. The floorboards groaned faintly as footsteps echoed, though the hallway outside remained silent. Each minor noise was amplified, magnifying fear in a way that made the space feel smaller, constricting. The first anomaly was subtle, a streak along the far wall, easily dismissed as a shadow at first glance. But as the traveler adjusted their focus, the streak darkened, seeming almost to pulse, slow and deliberate, as if it were breathing. The narrator leans in, threading tension through every word. It starts as a glance, a detail you almost overlook, until the overlooked becomes undeniable. The streak begins to spread, widening in slow, viscous movement. The traveler's eyes widen in disbelief, heart rate accelerating, every instinct screaming that the room is no longer ordinary. The tension escalates as sensory detail deepens. The metallic smell grows sharper, mingling with a faintly sweet odor that makes the stomach churn. The wall seems to throb under the neon light, as if alive, its surface rippling slightly, though no breeze exists. The traveler steps closer, compelled by equal parts curiosity and terror. Every step creaks unnaturally on the floorboards, the sound echoing in the room as if announcing trespass to something unseen. Shadows gather at the edges, thickening and stretching toward the spreading stain. Psychological horror takes center stage. The traveler tries to rationalize. Paint, rust, or some trick of light, but when their hand hesitantly touches the wall, the surface feels wet, sticky, and impossibly warm. A shiver runs down the spine as they pull back, realizing that the streak is more than a stain. It is alive in a horrifying sense. A low, wet gurgle emanates from the wall, barely audible, yet unmistakably present. The narrator's voice drops, almost a whisper. Walls remember. They bleed for those who see too much, for those who dare to look closer. The tension is punctuated with auditory and visual shocks. The neon sign flickers violently, causing the wall to appear to pulse in rhythm with the light. The metallic smell sharpens into something nearly metallic, like iron, and the sweet undertone becomes acrid, almost suffocating. Every object in the room seems exaggerated. The floorboard groans louder, the curtains twitch slightly, and the air grows colder, pressing against the traveler's skin. The sensation is overwhelming, combining fear, dread, and a creeping nausea. The climax of horror approaches as the wall begins to bleed more distinctly. A thick, dark liquid oozes downward, forming patterns reminiscent of veins, pooling slowly at the base. The traveler stumbles backward, their eyes wide with shock, heartbeat hammering. The room feels alive now, almost sentient, pressing in with a suffocating weight. The low, wet gurgling intensifies, now accompanied by faint whispers that seem to curl around the edges of the room. See me, feel me, never leave. Every instinct screams to flee, yet the door is impossibly far, and the floorboards groan ominously with each step. Psychological terror heightens with intimate focus. The traveler's breathing is ragged, each exhale visible in the suddenly cold air. Their hand shakes violently as they reach for the doorknob. Shadows dance grotesquely on the walls, forming humanoid shapes that twist and contort before vanishing. Every sound is amplified. The drip of liquid, the low gurgle, the faint whispering, creating a rhythm of suspense that mirrors the traveler's own racing heartbeat. The narrator adds, "Some rooms are designed to contain the living, but some are designed to contain what has been forgotten, until now." The section closes with a chilling mini-hook. The liquid streak spreads across the room, pooling near the bed and creeping slowly toward the traveler's feet. The whispers coalesce into a single, clear voice. "You cannot leave." The neon light flickers violently one final time, casting grotesque shadows across the wall. The traveler's eyes are fixed on the bleeding surface, frozen in horror, as the room itself seems to pulse in anticipation. The narrator leaves the listener in suspended terror, perfectly primed for the next story, where the horror escalates from the supernatural to the unthinkably grotesque. The motel's elevator was old, its metal doors scratched and dulled from decades of use. yet it had a hypnotic familiarity to anyone passing through the building. The couple had been exploring the surrounding area all day and returned exhausted, carrying the weight of fatigue and hunger. The dimly lit lobby was empty except for the low hum of the fluorescent lights overhead, and the faint smell of industrial cleaner hung in the air. The narrator's voice cuts in, calm yet chilling. Some elevators are designed to carry you safely, and some are designed to trap you in a vertical prison where fear is measured in seconds and breaths. The couple stepped inside the small, confined car, the metal walls reflecting their tired, anxious faces. The button panel was worn, numbers barely visible, and the air inside was thick, heavy, pressing down like a physical force. The soft creak of the doors closing seemed unnaturally loud, echoing in the empty shaft as if announcing the start of something inevitable. The faint flicker of the overhead light illuminated small scratches on the metal, each one a subtle reminder of the countless previous passengers whose stories were now silent. At first, the ride was uneventful. The car moved smoothly, the rhythmic hum of machinery oddly comforting. The couple exchanged quiet words, attempting to distract themselves from the oppressive stillness. But subtle anomalies began to unsettle them. A faint vibration that didn't correspond with movement, a low metallic groan that seemed to echo from within the walls, and the flickering light, which cast their elongated shadows in unsettling, unnatural ways. The narrator whispers, "It is the small, almost imperceptible details that announce terror. The creak, the flicker, the pause. All are warnings if you dare to listen." The tension escalates as the elevator slows, halting between floors with a subtle jolt. Panic flares in their chest, heartbeats accelerating. The button panel flashes erratically, numbers changing without input. A faint scratching sound reverberates through the car, low and deliberate, impossible to locate. The couple calls out, pressing buttons frantically, but no response comes from the control panel, no indicator of movement, no reassurance from the outside. The confined space amplifies every sound, turning each creak, groan, and vibration into an instrument of terror. Psychological horror takes center stage. The couple's breathing becomes shallow, synchronized with the growing tension. The air grows colder, their exhalations visible in thin clouds. Shadows stretch across the metal walls in unnatural ways, almost humanoid, twisting with every flicker of the overhead light. The faint scent of something coppery, metallic, rises from the corners of the car, subtle but unmistakable. Each heartbeat feels audible, echoing violently within their chest, while the low hum of the elevator machinery becomes a distorted rhythm that sets the tone for impending dread. The narrative heightens suspense with sensory details. The floor beneath them seems to shiver, and the walls pulse slightly, giving the impression of movement, though the elevator remains still. The couple clings to each other, hands gripping tightly, eyes darting to every corner, every shadow. A faint whisper creeps into the car, indecipherable yet unmistakably present, threading through the tight metal space and curling around their consciousness. "You cannot leave." Panic surges, rational thought colliding with instinctual fear. Auditory tension escalates. The metallic groans become louder, sharper, resonating unnaturally in the small car. Scratching and faint tapping echo from the corners. Yet the source is impossible to locate. The couple presses the emergency button, their voices trembling as they call for help, but only the distorted, tinny crackle of static responds. The confined space magnifies their vulnerability. Even small, innocuous sounds are transformed into signals of imminent danger. The audience is pulled into the claustrophobia, sensing every trembling wall, every flicker of light, every unexplained noise as a personal threat. The climax of tension arrives when the overhead light flickers violently and dies, plunging the elevator into near-total darkness. The only illumination comes from the faint, red glow of the emergency button. Shadows seem to writhe across the walls, reaching toward the couple. The metallic groaning escalates into a low, guttural roar, vibrating through the car. The narrator whispers, voice threading directly into the listener's imagination. "In the dark, your senses deceive you. In the dark, the fear becomes tangible, and the walls themselves seem alive. As panic reaches its peak, the elevator jerks violently, moving slightly, then stopping abruptly again. The couple clings together, breathless, their fear peaking. A soft tapping begins from behind the metal walls, slow, deliberate, almost mocking. They realize that whatever is present is not outside. They are trapped inside, observed, toyed with. The confined metal box has become a living nightmare, a vertical prison where each second stretches into infinity, and the ordinary act of descent becomes a test of endurance, fear, and sanity. The section closes with a chilling mini-hook. The couple presses the emergency button once more. The red light pulses erratically. A faint whisper, unmistakable and terrifying, curls from the corners of the elevator. "You can't leave, not yet." The flickering light briefly illuminates shadows that resemble human figures pressed against the walls, then vanishes. The car remains suspended between floors, the silence deafening, leaving the couple frozen in terror. The narrator leaves the listener suspended, eyes wide, heart racing, perfectly primed for the final stories where horror will reach its ultimate crescendo. The motel lobby was deserted, its cracked linoleum floors reflecting the flickering neon lights outside. The lone night clerk had finished his shift hours ago, leaving the building bathed in an unnatural quiet. The late-night traveler approached the reception desk, dragging a small suitcase and shivering under the weight of unease. The air smelled faintly of damp carpet, bleach, and something subtler, an undercurrent of copper, metallic, and almost sinister. The narrator's voice cuts in, low and chilling. "Some nights, the guest you do not see is the one who watches, waits, and finally decides when the story ends." The traveler's key card barely worked, the magnetic strip scraping against the reader with a faint hiss. The door to their room swung open slowly, creaking, revealing a dimly lit space that seemed slightly different from before, though impossible to articulate. Shadows clung to corners, stretching in unnatural angles, bending toward the neon glow outside. The first signs of intrusion were subtle. A chair slightly out of place, the faint scent of something metallic stronger near the bed, and a cold draft that seemed to seep from the walls themselves. The psychological tension begins to escalate. The traveler sets down their bag and notices an envelope atop the nightstand, sealed in thick black paper. No handwriting, no identifying marks. Trembling, they break the seal and unfold the paper to find a single sentence. "I've been waiting." The words, stark and deliberate, resonate through the silent room, amplifying fear with intimate precision. Every instinct screams that they are not alone, yet the room appears empty. The narrator adds, "The final guest does not knock, does not announce itself. It arrives quietly, and when you notice, it is already too late." The tension heightens as subtle phenomena escalate. The lamp flickers violently, shadows twisting grotesquely across the walls. The air grows colder, breath visible in thin clouds, each inhale sharp and shallow. The faint metallic scent thickens, mingling with a subtle, sickly sweet odor that provokes nausea. The room itself seems to pulse with life, each object vibrating as if aware of the traveler's presence. The bedspread lifts slightly without cause, a chair rotates slowly, and the closet door, closed moments ago, creaks open a fraction. Auditory horror punctuates the rising tension. The soft hum of the neon outside is interrupted by faint, deliberate footsteps, though the hallway beyond the door remains empty. A whisper curls through the room, indecipherable yet deliberate, threading around corners and curling into the listener's imagination. "I am here." The traveler freezes, heart racing, every muscle taut. Rationality conflicts with instinctual fear. The ordinary room has become a predator's lair, every shadow a potential threat. The narrative deepens the emotional impact by focusing on internal terror. The traveler's pulse quickens, hands trembling as they reach for the doorknob. Cold sweat drips down their spine. Every glance at the corners of the room reveals movement where none should exist, fleeting shadows that vanish the moment directly observed. The metallic scent rises to an almost suffocating intensity, blending with the sweet, coppery undertone to create a sense of dread that saturates the skin, lungs, and mind alike. Sudden visual horror strikes. The mirror across from the bed fogs rapidly, revealing faint writing, "I am always behind you." The traveler spins, yet no one is there. The room's corners seem to twist, elongating, distorting reality itself. The narrator's voice lowers, pulling the listener close. The final guest exists in perception, in hesitation, in every heartbeat you cannot control. It is the fear that lingers, the presence that never leaves. The climax builds. Objects begin moving more aggressively. The chair tilts fully over. A glass rattles violently on the nightstand. The bedspread lifts, forming a shape that almost resembles a figure crouched and watching. The traveler backs into the corner, eyes wide, chest heaving, frozen by the overwhelming presence. The faint whispering grows into a cacophony, overlapping voices from unseen corners of the room. "You cannot leave, you belong." The shadows stretch, twisting grotesquely across walls and ceiling. Every sense is on fire. Every instinct screams escape is impossible. The section closes with a cliffhanger designed to leave the audience on edge. The traveler's gaze darts toward the open closet door, and from within emerges a fleeting, humanoid silhouette, vanishing the moment it is fully glimpsed. The lamp flickers violently one final time, and the room plunges into near-total darkness. The metallic, coppery smell saturates the air, mingled with the unmistakable odor of decay. The narrator leaves the listener suspended in terror. The final guest does not knock, does not leave, and does not forgive. Some nights, it stays forever. The motel had long been abandoned, but the stories of its dark nights lingered like shadows in the corners of the memory. The receptionist had locked up years ago, leaving behind dusty ledgers and empty hallways that seemed to stretch endlessly. Outside, the neon sign flickered weakly, half-broken, casting jagged red and blue light across the cracked asphalt. The narrator's voice cuts in, low and haunting. Every motel has a story, but some carry more than memories. They carry the echoes of fear, the residue of those who never truly left. The camera, or the imagination, follows a late-night visitor, approaching the weathered doors, suitcase in hand. A chill wind presses against the skin, carrying the faint metallic scent of old blood and iron that clings to every corner. The silence is almost deafening, broken only by the distant hum of failing neon and the occasional creak of loose siding swaying in the wind. The air itself seems to vibrate with anticipation, charged with the unseen energy of years of terror, fear, and unresolved stories. As the traveler pushes open the heavy door, a faint groan echoes through the lobby. Dust swirls in the dim light, revealing outlines of chairs tipped over. A bell on the counter cracked and tarnished. The faint, sweet metallic scent grows stronger, curling into the nasal passages like an invisible presence. The narrator emphasizes the psychological impact. Even in silence, you can feel it. The weight of eyes that watch from shadows, of footsteps that echo long after they have passed. The tension builds with sensory detail. The floorboards creak underfoot, each step amplified in the quiet emptiness. Shadows gather in corners, stretching unnaturally, and reflections in the dusty glass windows appear delayed, distorted, as if the room itself manipulates perception. The faint sound of distant whispers drifts from the upper floors, fragmented words impossible to decipher, yet unmistakably human. Every instinct screams the traveler is not alone, even though no one is visible. The narrative heightens emotional intensity as the motel itself seems to awaken. The walls pulse subtly, the faint odor of iron saturating the air. A door slams somewhere in the distance, followed by soft, deliberate footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. The traveler freezes, heart pounding, breath shallow. Shadows twist along the walls, forming grotesque silhouettes that dissolve and reappear as the neon flickers. The narrator whispers, "Some places remember." They record every scream, every shiver, every silent gasp of terror, and they replay it for anyone who dares to enter. A flicker of movement catches the eye. A figure, blurred and almost translucent, crosses the second-floor balcony. The traveler strains to see, but it vanishes as quickly as it appeared, leaving only a lingering sense of unease. Objects shift slightly in the corners. A chair tilted, a ledger open to a page that was blank moments ago, handwriting appearing slowly as if by invisible fingers. The faint whispering grows louder, a fragmented chorus that fills the space with the echo of countless stories. You shouldn't be here, leave or stay forever. The psychological horror deepens as the traveler ascends the stairs, each step echoing through the hollow building. The air grows colder, breath visible, fingernails tingling with the almost electric charge of anticipation. Every door they pass seems to twitch or groan, some opening just a fraction, others slamming shut as if pushed by unseen hands. The narrator draws the listener into intimate terror. Every room holds a story, but the last room, the one at the end, carries all the others. It waits for the final guest to arrive. The climactic tension builds in the final approach. The traveler reaches the top floor, hallway stretching endlessly. Doors line each side, their shadows stretching unnaturally, bending toward the neon glow. A faint metallic scent grows nearly suffocating. The faint whispering crescendos into a chorus of voices from unseen corners, overlapping, indistinguishable, yet coherent in intent. You belong here, forever. The traveler's pulse races, hands trembling, mind teetering between flight and frozen fascination. The final horror strikes subtly, psychologically. As the traveler reaches the last door, it slowly creaks open on its own. The hallway behind it appears to stretch, impossibly long, shadows moving as if alive. A cold, invisible force brushes past, carrying a mix of stale air, iron, and decay. The narrator concludes with chilling intimacy. Some motels close their doors at night, some close them forever, and some, they wait, for the last guest, for the eyes that will see, for the soul that will never leave. The section closes on a final cliffhanger that lingers in the imagination. The traveler hesitates at the threshold of the room, eyes wide, breath ragged. Shadows twist and pulse in the corners, whispers circling like a predator ready to strike. The neon light flickers violently, then dies, leaving only darkness and the metallic tang in the air. The narrator leaves the listener suspended, heart racing, with the haunting realization that some doors, once closed, are never truly locked, and some stories never truly end.